All right. Hey, folks. Today we're going to talk about an interesting topic, somewhat obscure topic, that is the natural limit. So I wanted to tackle this. I've been wanting to tackle this for a while because I think there's a lot of opinions out there on this and they're not all factually based. So I'm going to present you with the facts, and regardless of what side of the fence you fall on, whether you think there is a limit or there's not a limit, I think you'll find this interesting. So please do watch on and do try and watch till the end. I think people have a habit of reading titles and giving their opinions, but it would be nice if people watch till the end so they see the magnitude of what I'm saying. And I am going to support this with citations in the descriptions. Hopefully you'll find this an interesting watch. And if, by the way, if my eyes are going back and forth, it's because I have a lot of notes to cover for this topic, so bear with me. So I think the topic is, it's not particularly relevant to a lot of people because you're just going to try and gain, but I think it's a topic whose significance can't be understated. Okay, it does define our limits, supposedly. So now the natural limit is often cited as a maximum FFMI of 25. Okay, so to decipher that, the FFMI is a similar measurement to BMI. It's done with the same formula, but it just is based on lean body mass rather than total body mass. And the idea that's been posited is that 25 is a hard limit which you're not going to surpass if you're natural. Okay. Now, where this came from originally was a study released in '95, but I want to dig into what the study actually said, what it showed. So essentially, the study concluded that after examining 156 athletes, that 25 represented a probable limit for natural human development. Now, there were a lot of caveats, and I'm going to go over what the data showed, but also what the caveats are and the integrity of the study. But that's where it originated. Okay, so if you want to know, like, where did this number come from, that's where it came from, a '95 study. And again, I will link to that in the description so you can have a look for yourself. Now, the problem with the data and the conclusion was the way that the data was collected. So essentially, what the study researchers did was they selected 156 people from the local area, Boston and Los Angeles, just the local gyms, and just a random recruitment of people. So they weren't really trying to find the limits, the peak of physical advancement. They were just trying to get participants to participate in the study who were at least 16 years old and had at least 2 years of lifting experience. That's it. They weren't looking for the absolute peak chads in the local area. They were just looking for a random selection of people. And if you think about it, if I went to the local gyms in my hometown and I selected 100 people or 156 people, I would probably see a fairly average range of muscularity, I think. Just look at your gym, the gym that you go to, and imagine 156 of those people from local gyms in your city. Like, does that represent the pinnacle of human achievement? Or is it data which shows an average representation of the average guy? I think I'm one of the more muscular guys at my gym. There are a couple of other guys there as well who are pretty jacked, but I'm nowhere near the peak of muscularity for a human being. So I think it's a little bit of a stretch to say that we can posit that there is a human limit based on a selection of 150 guys from the local area. That in itself is a bit crazy, isn't it? So we're starting to see that the data itself from the study where it all originated from, it gives us room for pause. And I am going to go on and I will explain there are modern studies which look at this, so bear with me, okay? But I just want to talk through this first. So that idea that from that data we can extrapolate there's a hard limit of 25, it's a bit of a stretch. Yeah, I think you'll agree, it's a bit of a stretch. Imagine if I was to take 150 guys from the local schools, okay, and I was to test their IQ. Maybe that would give me a very average sample of IQ. And from that, could I say that certain amounts are the limits of human intelligence? Of course not. There are some crazy intelligent people out there with very high IQs. It's just, it doesn't make any sense. That if you look at the data, like, that's where it comes from. It doesn't make any sense. Now, there is an interesting modern perspective on that data. There was a study done in 2017, which was actually led by Eric Trexler. So they looked at D1 collegiate players in America. Obviously, very high standard. Okay, very high standard. There's a lot of money in American football. So you're going to get absolute massive chads aiming for their career in the league because there's so much money involved, right? In that league, if you play for 10 years, you're set for life, right? That's who they tested. So they found that within that sample size, there were people vastly exceeding 25 FFMI. There were people up to 28 FFMI. Now, just to give you a bit of perspective on how big that is, 28 FFMI, if we were to look at somebody who's 6% body fat, 6%, by the way, is inside out peeled. At a height of 5'10", 5'11", they would be 210 pounds. Now, I want to put that into perspective for you guys who are not used to dealing with body fat percentages. I competed on stage at 176 at 5'10", 11. And I probably wasn't even 6%, I was maybe 8%. But I'm not a small guy, right? I was 176 on the day. These guys at 28 FFMI would be 210 pounds. That would dwarf me. That's insane. People talk about, oh, we're not busting past the natty limit. First of all, there doesn't appear to be a natural limit, even from the study itself, the original study. And second of all, yes, we are. We unequivocally are. We are battering the natural limit, if there is one. And I'm going to discuss the concept of a limit in a moment towards the end of the video, so bear with me. But yeah, just from that alone, you guys should see the ridiculousness of where the original 25 FFMI came from and then what we have in the modern day context. Now, before I go on, I just want to take it back to the original study. Part of what they did in the original study, because they recognized that there was a limitation of the average people from the area. So what they did was they tried to add data from previous Mr. America winners from 1939 to 1959. So guys like John Grimek, Steve Reeves, Farbotnik, Steve Stanko, the old school guys. And those guys had, even within that group, there were people well over 25 FFMI. So you had guys up to 28 FFMI even back then in 39 to 59. So the average was 25 amongst that group. So there were guys like Steve Reeves, for example, who was only 23, but you had guys who were as high as 28. So they said that data adds support to the notion, it adds support to the data they'd collected in the modern day context, because they understood the data they collected was quite weak. So that was quite interesting, that they looked at Mr. America winners from 39 to 59 to say, look, this is the peak of physical performance before steroids that can back up our point. When in actuality, there were people even within that group who were surpassing 25. So even that didn't point to the conclusion that they thought they were going to point to. And another thing is, from the original data set, there was at least one non-steroid user who was above 25 FFMI. So even within the original study, where all this came from, there was a natural guy in that study who was higher than 25 FFMI. So to consider that a limit is insane. It's crazy. So anyway, we have the original study from 95. We have this follow-up study from 2017, both of which suggest, and not even suggest, both of which clearly show there are people within those studies who are well over 25 FFMI. And again, a collection of just random dudes from your local city, that's not showing the limits of peak human performance at all. I think what it shows is that's probably an average. For the average guy, hitting 25 FFMI is a good target. But to surpass that would be done by people with great genetics. But you can surpass that with time and great genetics. I think time's a very important factor. But yeah, it's pretty nuts. I think it's pretty crazy that the concept of a natural limit got off the ground in the first place. I really am. The idea that's actually been present for 30 years, even when the data itself, the original data, showed there was one guy in the study who broke the limit. And that's crazy. But people have parroted that for 30 years. So I think it's crazy that this idea that there is a limit got off the ground in the first place. And also, most of these things within human achievement do fall within a bell curve, right? You're going to have extreme outliers on one end and on the other end. Again, that's what the data shows. The data shows that we're looking at about 25 FFMI for the average guy as a great level of development, a superb level of development, given time and good genetics. But there are going to be people, and there are people, who quite dominantly surpass that. And yes, if you want to use the phrase smash the limit, there was a guy who smashed the limit in 95 in the original study. The 2017 follow-up study, there were 6 linemen that surpassed that limit, battered it. Yeah, it just, it boggles the mind that people are pushing this as a limit. It's not a limit. It's a representation of an average population, of high achievement in an average population. But to suggest it's a human limit, it's just a very bad misinterpretation of the data. It's intellectually lazy, I think. The original study was flawed heavily. It was bad science, and any interpretation from that cannot be taken seriously. So I would encourage you guys to look at my citations below, and that will help verify my message in this video. But I want to end just by discussing, what do people have to gain from promoting this idea that there is a limit, this false idea there's a limit? I don't know. I really don't know. I don't know what people think they gain from essentially blackpilling their audience into saying there's a limit when there isn't. I don't know what people gain. I think with some people, they've had that belief for so long, they've never really questioned it, and they don't want to change their opinion now because they would be seen as being wrong previously. So they don't want to come across as being wrong to their audience because they want to come across as a guy who knows everything. I think that's definitely one. I think for others, maybe they're blackpilling people on what they can achieve for some reason. I don't really know. But yeah, it's a difficult question to answer. Like, because the question is inevitably, my favorite influencer says there is a limit and 25 is the limit and we're not smashing through that. What are you talking about? I would just say, if your favorite influencer actually looked at the data, which he clearly hasn't, then they would realize off their own back, assuming they can read, that there is no limit. Even the original data was flawed. So I don't know what people have to gain by pushing this idea that there's a limit. I think it's silly. There clearly isn't. Even within the data set from the original study where it all came from, there clearly wasn't. And in the modern context, we've blown that limit out of the water. Even within 1939 to 59, those Mr. America winners, plenty of those guys were 27, 28 FFMI. 28 is massive, like legitimately massive. So even from back then to suggest that there was a limit based on conditions back then and guys who worked full-time jobs who didn't have the best sort of living conditions like we do now. We have a much greater quality of life now in general, far less stresses. There was wars going on and all that stuff back then. Yeah, to suggest that was a limit is just insane, I think. It's not even insane. It's intellectually dishonest, I think, is the better way of putting it. So yeah, I would encourage you guys to find the references yourself in the description. I would also encourage you to maybe think about forwarding this to other people who vehemently defend the 25 FFMI, because I honestly, if they're not intellectually honest enough to look at the data, they won't listen to me. I think they'll just dismiss this as another guy with his head in the clouds. But it's the data. I think the problem is influencers or whoever has this bee in their bonnet about there being a limit. I think they're just blackpilling you and they're not looking at the data. They don't want to appear silly. They don't want to correct themselves for fear of looking silly, which is ridiculous, really. We all get things wrong, but the data is the data. You know, if at some point, I don't know, the data gets reanalyzed and 25 is a limit, fine. But for now, the original data didn't even say 25 was the limit, like where this all came from. And the recent study 6 years ago, that suggests 25 is hardly a limit. It's a great standard for the average guy. I think that's the best way to put it. It's a great standard for the average guy. It's certainly not a limit. It never was. Not in 95, not in 1939, and certainly not now. Folks, I'm going to call it there. Would love to hear your opinions on this. Yeah, don't get blackpilled. A lot of this shouldn't really apply to many people. Just train and gain. But the theoretical argument that there's a limit is just nuts. It's just laughable. Anyway, I'm going to call it there. Hopefully you guys have a great day.